Hello, everyone. Welcome to Art Lounge Alley. I am your host, and we're going to continue on with Figure Drawing Basics Part 95. And here is where we left off from yesterday. I got into the next lesson, which is hands, how to draw hands. This is something that I think a lot of people have a hard time with. But it's very crucial. I think it's really important to get this down. I mean, pretty much the entire process of drawing, all the things that we've covered, they all hold importance as a whole. So the key is to just draw as much as possible. Divide things into different parts, spend your time working on the head. If you're a total beginner, take it a step further back and try to practice drawing basic shapes and getting really good at them. Just without a problem, being able to draw the circle perfectly, not oblong, not like a weird shape, or trying to be really quick about it, and avoid that, because something I mention very frequently, the head is going to be your unit of measurement as a way to make sure everything else in the body is proportionate to it. And all the rest of the parts of the body are proportionate to each other. So if you're going to have a warped looking head, if one side is bigger than the other, you're going to be using it as a unit of measurement, and it's going to warp and ripple through the entire body, basically. For example, this is a very common example, which is for instance, one of the rules for getting the measurements right is, let's say if you wanted to find out what the width of the arm is, right? Like, how do you know? What's a way to make sure that the arm is proportionate to the rest of the body? So this is one of the ways to do it. You measure half the head, right? You draw the head, then you draw the line down the middle as a guide for a lot of other things as well. Then you measure half of that, and it should be the width of the arm. Now, if you draw the head warped, right, if you just do a quick shape, it doesn't matter, and then you measure that, it's going to be a really wide looking head. And then you measure this half, and then you do the other side, and it's going to be more narrow. And then the rest of the body, if you measure the width of the body, right, like, how do you know how wide the body should be? It's supposed to be 3 heads, including the shoulders. 3 heads going across. So if the head is warped and then you measure 3 heads across, it's going to be a really broad torso. So you could see, once you understand these measurement principles, how important it is to make sure that you draw the head correctly. And the way you do that is by practicing these basic shapes. And as you could see in this example, the body in its most basic form is comprised of mainly a cylinder shape. That's the quickest way to go about it. When you're sketching the figure, if you're trying to get down the body pose, the gesture, it's a lot better to just immediately jump to something so simplified as opposed to struggling with it, drawing, erasing it, testing it out, hoping that at some point your eye is going to notice the right proportions. This way you're able to just quickly give yourself some parameters, give yourself some proportions, make sure that it fits exactly where you want it to be. It's not going to go off the page, it's not going to go to the side, either side. So drawing the cylinder shape, getting really good at it, being very quick, allows you to do that with the body. You could just immediately start sketching out all these different parts using the cylinder shape, as you could see here. So multiple ways to improve. And again, as I mentioned, you could start sectioning things out once you get past this point, once you start getting past these very basic approaches, drawing the cylinder shape, drawing the circle, that sort of thing, shading from shadow into highlights, from highlights into shadows. Once you get more and more familiar with that and you want to take it up to the next level, start sectioning things out. Spend your time drawing lips, spend your time drawing the eyes, spend your time drawing the nose, and just little by little improve on all those features And at the same time, practice drawing the face as well while you're practicing all these different techniques. Now, by the sounds of it, it's pretty overwhelming, right? And that's why it's important to draw every day. Spend an hour every day, and you will see some results. You will continuously be in the zone of drawing. Every day, if you spend just an hour, you're getting that much closer to improving. And the way I like to think of it is, for example, what happens in watercolor. If you do one layer and you let it dry for a while, it's going to fade. You know, the colors, the opacity of it is going to fade eventually. But if you keep working on top of it, you know, layer by layer, the more often you do it, the thicker and more prominent it becomes. Now think of that as a metaphor for your learning. If you spend too much time in between your sessions, it's going to fade. So you're going to have to reapply the effort again to remember all those things. You know, so you want to reduce the amount of time of your what you've learned, so it doesn't fade away. That you could recite things with a lot more ease. And another reason why it's important to draw daily. And the more you get better at all these different things that you saw in this little sketchbook, the more you're going to want to take on the challenge of taking it to the next level. And the more you can, you know, improve on all those things simultaneously. You know, spend 15 minutes focusing on warming up with basic shapes and all those other examples you saw in here. Then move on to focusing on drawing just the eyes. And draw that all over the page. You know, this is something that I wanted to show you guys in this sketchbook, which was the idea of it, is to push you guys to draw all over. You know, spend time, and you're going to see a lot of these hands. I'm going to be showing you guys examples, but notice how pretty much all over the page I'm covering just exercises, trying to get better, trying to get better understanding of it. Just fill them up as much as possible on what you're focusing on. So here you see hands, next you could do eyes, then you could do lips, then you could do like all these very simplified figure drawings as you see here. Just spend as much time as possible, and eventually all those things that I mentioned aren't going to be overwhelming. They're going to be second nature, kind of. And something I like to say frequently, it's something like, you know, something we all do, regardless of what our profession is, what our interest is, we read and write. And the time that we spent reading or learning to read, we had to recite the alphabet multiple times. You know, there's a lot of letters there, so we had to spend our time remembering those letters, remembering how to pronounce them, and then eventually we just recite the alphabet without a problem, right? Even though there were so many words and or so many letters rather, we eventually just know them so well. It's second nature to us. And when it comes to reading, it's the same thing. You know, you had to learn certain words, and now you don't even think about them, and you don't have to like look up the definition for them. You just know them, and you fluently read them. Same thing happens with drawing. You spend time learning all these things separately, just like you do with letters, just like you do with words. And eventually, it becomes really easy for you to be able to sketch out these different parts of the face, of the body. It doesn't become as intimidating as it sounds now when you're just starting to learn. So yeah, with that said, I'm going to continue working on hands. And I'm going to do that all over the page. I'm going to give you some examples here. Well, let me use the blue pencil. I really do enjoy it. So I'm starting out with like a box shape kind of as the wrist. And just like you see it here, I'm just going to continue to simplify it in this box form. I'm going to create the divisions. Now, something I talked about before when it comes to drawing the hands, it's not as straight as you would imagine. Sometimes people make the mistake of really kind of drawing them like popsicle sticks, but notice here how it gradually gets wider. It starts off at the tip, the tip of the finger, gets a little bit thicker towards the middle, and then towards the bottom. It's at its most thickest point. So it's not incredibly wide as you see here. Like I'm gonna, for the sake of just giving this example, the width, the gradual increase in width isn't as exaggerated as you see it here. It's a little bit more gradual. It's very subtle. So that's really important to note. You don't want to create popsicle sticks. You want to be able to pay attention to this sort of detail. Don't, I'm going to say two things about this, and I'm going to say that for pretty much all of the features and body parts and so on. You have to combine two things. You have to combine this understanding, right? This explanation, this like kind of general concept about, let's say, the fingers or the nose or the eyes or the lips. There's this general knowledge, right? And then there's also what you see. So you have to kind of combine both. You have to juggle both as you're drawing. Pay attention to things as you see them, and also try to shape it as you understand them. And that will really improve your drawing, because if you isolate it to just what you understand, you're going to miss certain detail that really brings out the likeness of somebody. You get close to actually drawing them as they are, as you see them, as opposed to a more stylized version or more simplified version, whatever it is. But by paying attention to little details as you see them, allows you to get closer and closer to them. Little things like the width of the mouth, or the little corners of the mouth, the width of the nostrils, the direction of the nostrils. Are they going further up? Are they arching down? Minute little things, believe it or not, add up to actually making the person look the way that you see them. So yeah, just a note for yourself. And I think it helps to write these things down, as I mentioned, and as you could see up here, keep it light. As you take these notes, you could write it in your sketchbook, and it's easier for you to remember it every time you sit down to draw, rather than having to sit and be like, what was it that I had to keep in mind? What are the things that are important to remember while I'm drawing? You could write all those things in your sketchbook and then recite them and then rewrite them every time you turn to a new page to sketch, to practice. But yeah, I think drawing, I'm going to write it up here, draw as you see and draw as you understand. And that really is the best. Well, for me, that summarizes it. Draw as you see, draw as you understand. And every time you're going to look at that, you're going to remember, oh yeah, this is what that's about, what this sentence is about. Draw as you see and draw as you understand. And then having other things like keeping it light, not pressing too hard. Having all that written down for you and for you to be able to look through. It's a lot easier than having to remember, along with all the other stuff that you have to remember throughout the day. So writing is your best friend as well when it comes to drawing. So anyways, going back to this, drawing as you understand, this is a really important detail. You have to recognize that each finger, even on your own hand, right? If you look at it, at a first glance, it might look like in a very general way, like, yeah, it's kind of like popsicle sticks. But then if you study it closely, you could see how this is thinner than this, and how this is thinner than that. You know, you really look at it, you really study it and pay attention to it, and try to notice the difference between all these three sections. You know, pay attention to little dips within the divides between the joints, you know, and just really study that stuff. So again, combining both what you understand and what you see. Seeing all these indentations, seeing these little curves, like if you pay attention to this right here, and I'm trying to face it towards the camera so you guys can really see that, but this little curve right here, you know, that's important. That really brings out more character in your drawing, in noticing these little things. You know, in your hand it might be different, but there's definitely going to be some sort of a little detail that you can pay attention to, that's going to bring your drawing to life even more so, give it more character, instead of just like popsicle sticks. So yeah, here, you know, this is more of like a simplified version, but again, it maintains that gradual, subtle width increase as it gets to the base of the arm, of the hand. And notice how after I created the box and I created the divides, it was a lot easier to start shaping this according to proportion to each other. You know, now this finger is similar to this, and so on and so forth. And I think the most difficult thing that comes to drawing hands, well, one of the most, because some people might catch on to things or do things better than others in one way, and others will do something else better than somebody else. So I think the most common one, and that probably applies to all parts of the body, but I noticed that people who are learning have a more difficult time with hands because of not recognizing the limitations. You know, like, you don't want to create a really broad palm. You know, you have to understand the limit from side to side and to draw the fingers within that limit. Because sometimes what people do is they'll start to draw one finger, right? And then they'll eventually get to the second finger. And then because they're not really paying attention to the space difference between objects, you know, how much space there is between this finger and this finger, this finger and this finger, etc., it might end up becoming really broad. Even though you drew the fingers, you might have drawn the detailed outline of each finger, you didn't account for the space in between the fingers and just generally how much space there is before it starts to look kind of wonky. So that's why it's important to draw out the box, you know, to draw out a general shape as you did with the figure, you know, as you guys saw in this example here. That's the benefit of drawing out the figure in its basic form, because then you set yourself the limits. You're like, okay, this is how wide the arm is going to be, this is how long the arm is going to be, this is how long the torso is going to be, etc., etc. And then you could start going into detail and start really shaping, adding muscles, adding like more definitive lines, more characteristical lines. So the same applies to the hand. Once you start with the box form, you already set yourself the limits, and you have to work within those limits to draw out the fingers. So that's one example here. I'm going to do another example. And if you guys want like larger sized examples of this, just let me know. Drop your comments in chat. That way I can give you guys better examples. It's kind of hard to guess, really. So again, I'm going to start with like a box shape. Kind of like a box shape. And in this example, I'm going to show you guys something that I'm sure a lot of you have noticed probably on your own hand, but drawing is a different experience. It's something that requires hand-eye coordination as opposed to just being able to see things. So sometimes these little details kind of go over people's attention, or they're not really focused on it. But in this example, I'm just going to show you guys how each finger has its own length. Like the index finger is not as... The longest finger is going to be the middle finger. The index finger is going to be the third. The ring finger is going to be the second highest next to the middle finger. The index finger is going to be the third. And then, of course, the pinky is going to be the smallest finger out of the four, and then of course your thumb, but it's just not on the same plane, let's just say. So yeah, in this example I just wanted to show you guys the limits of each finger, kind of. So this is something else that you could add to your way of drawing as you understand things. When you sit down to draw a hand and something's off about it, check these things. Check these little rules. Like maybe this hand that I'm drawing, I forgot to pay attention to the length of each one. Now let's see if I could do another one over here, I guess. And that's going to be to demonstrate how, actually, this is a really important one, how the fingers sit on the palm. This is also another very common mistake. And notice how there's an arch already up here in this like box shape that I created. So the thumb is going to be here, but everything else is going to follow that curve. So the first joint, right, it's going to go up to here. Then the next one is going to take the same curvature to it until finally we're at the very tip. So I'm just going to sketch them out lightly. And if you guys are struggling with something that's in your learning process, whatever it is that you're focusing on, post it in chat. Let's talk about it. Let's bring it up to other people's attention. Maybe they're experiencing the same thing and it could actually help them improve. I could also give you guys some pointers on how you can improve and what your outlook can be to keep you motivated to keep practicing. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you guys about that as well. So just to reiterate again, just notice how everything is following a curve. So the lines that you're going to see dividing all the different joints are going to be at a curve as well. The tip of the fingers, there should be a curve to them as well. As we mentioned, you can see that there's a difference, and that difference kind of follows this curvature. You don't want to make the mistake of drawing the hands on a straight line. Like you see it here, but this is mainly for, you could see that they're sitting on this like straight line kind of. But that's really just to give you guys an example of like a broad example of the shape of the hand and what you could do to just construct it in a simple form. But once you're past that simple form and you start shaping it out to be a little bit more realistic, that's when you could start applying these concepts, the curvature and changing things, or like moving things a little bit. As I mentioned, that's why it's important to sketch lightly in the beginning. The wireframe of everything, whether it's the body or the hands or the fingers, that should be light. That it shouldn't be incredibly detailed or brought towards the front of the focus. It should be towards the back. And once you establish the parameters, the general shape, the gesture, whatever the gesture might be, then you could start slowly, little by little, shaping it out to look more natural, more realistic, rather than, these box shapes that you see here. So, just to reiterate, because I am going to switch to the next page to continue, or I'm going to find another page where I could fit in more hand examples. We talked about the joints here, how they're sitting on the rest of the finger, and how you could really make use of practicing your hands by using these box forms. Because again, the width of the fingers at the base isn't that big of a difference. You're not going to have like a really thin pinky, a wide index finger, a really thin middle finger, more of a wide index finger. It's all going to be pretty much the same. So when you're creating these little boxes, you could follow that pattern that allows you to construct it in that way. The fingers shouldn't be much longer than the palm. It shouldn't be like that long as opposed to the palm itself. Like if I measure it down from where the wrist is, the joint, where there's this whole like ball and socket kind of thing. So from that section to right where the fingers are resting on, or like they're kind of placed on, you could see that the fingers are just about the same. Like the middle finger is about, just a little shorter, I'm going to say, than the palm. But measure it on your own hand. Pay attention. As I mentioned, sorry, I guess I didn't show you guys, but if you measure from the wrist to right about this line right here, and you can see that the fingers are a little bit shorter than the palm, but that might vary a little bit. So you might want to check with your own hand. Measure like the longest finger, it being your middle finger, and see how, let's just use the pencil as the example. how long it actually is. So for my hand, I'm gonna say the very tip, it's shorter than a palm. See, it doesn't come down to where the joint is. So I'm gonna say like that. You can see it's like I'm gonna say it's like about an inch shorter. Your fingers are a bit like an inch shorter than. Because you guys still couldn't see it. It's kind of hard to notice what the camera is showing. But yeah, just having to measure that. Let's say from here to here. It's probably about that long. And then from here to however long it goes. So you could see it doesn't reach all the way to where the joint is. This area right here. So it's a bit shorter. So that's another important thing to know. Now again, if you guys don't grasp this all immediately, it's not a big deal. You could always rewatch this episode. You could rewatch it, take some notes. Highly encourage you guys to take notes. Just like write this stuff down so that you could recite it at your own time. As I mentioned, writing it in your sketchbook, it allows you to like flip back to that page and be like, oh yeah, there are these things that I have to look out for. But essentially, if you just draw a lot, you will recognize those things on your own. The more time you spend, the harder you focus on the subject or the reference, the more and more you're going to start to recognize these little things. And if you're paying attention to these streams, when you are sitting down to draw the fingers, you're going to see it yourself, and you're going to be like, oh yeah, I remember talking about like the length of the fingers. So I remember the curvature of these lines, these dividing lines, and how the tip of the fingers also have a curvature to it, that it shouldn't be just like flat going across, So yeah, just these things could jog your memory at some point when you're practicing to draw these features. All right, so I'm gonna move on to another section. Trying to find a good page that I didn't utilize space in. I'm gonna start here. Why not? So I'm gonna continue on with more examples. It's like I'm gonna say the base, like the palm, when you're drawing the palm of the hand, it's like toast, like the shape of a toast. Kind of like, it's not exactly straight parallel to each other. They're at an angle, they're arching, they're coming down more into the wrist area. So just thinking of a toast when you draw that. And I think that sometimes it helps when you're like attaching strange related objects or strange related shapes. It kind of makes it easier to remember. It's just like a bizarre concept that sticks out in your memory more. Or like a silly concept that might stick out more. So again, this like toast shape came to the rescue. It set the parameters. So I have to draw the fingers, all 4 fingers, to fit within the toast. And I think it's because it's a simplified idea, like a piece of toast. It's not as intimidating to draw as an actual palm. A palm obviously has more detail on it, but to have that simplified form, you could imagine a piece of toast. And then from there, of course, you could shape it out to be more realistic, resembling real features. I'm going to take a moment to measure this out. Right, it doesn't reach at the very base. It doesn't reach where the joint is, like right about there. So it looks about right. You're just training yourself for your eye to be able to just naturally see things proportionally. Again, this is like when you're reading, you don't have to recite the alphabet, you don't have to look up the definition of the words, you just read. So you're just trying to get your eye to that level where you just draw things correctly. You draw them anatomically correct, you draw them proportionately. And by constantly measuring things out in the beginning, it's like looking up words. It's like reciting the letters. It's like writing things down over and over again. It's your method of instilling knowledge in your memory. So the stream is coming closer and closer towards an end. There's still I'm going to say 10 minutes, but I'm going to take the time to remind newcomers, those who are just tuning in, and those of you who have who stuck through, that the next stream is going to be the special stream, and I'm really excited about that. It's going to be a continuation of Gil Elfgren. He's one of my favorite pinup artists. He's an amazing illustrator, just beautiful paintings. It's going to be a continuation. It's going to be part 3. Now, part 1 and 2 you guys can check out by heading over to the video section, filtering it based on collection, and where what you will see is folders pop up, and there's going to be a folder for highlights, which is basically where all the special streams are from all the previous streams of the Art Lounge Alley. If you're on YouTube, you could just go to the playlist section, and over there you're going to see those folders there as well. It's the same thing. They're all divided based on each stream, including the highlights stream, the highlights folder that has all the special streams in it. And there you guys can catch up with episode 1 and 2. And I talk about different artists. I talk about the history of illustration, history of pinup art, really, commercial art, that sort of thing. There's some there's interesting points about the history of it, and you guys get to see some beautiful paintings. And that's going to be in part 3 as well. That's going to be a continuation. I'm going to show you guys more artists. I'm going to show you more beautiful paintings and just talk about the history of each one of them. So that's coming up next. That's 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And in the meantime, I'm just going to continue on with hand sketches. I'm going to say the most useful tool that you could teach yourself, talking about all the different tools you pull out in order to get the results that you want, is recognizing the space relationship between objects, between features. So for example, when you are drawing the finger and it's a reference, let's say, well, how thick is that finger supposed to be, right? And you could look at the reference and you could pay attention to this gap between the top of the finger and then the bottom of it. How big is that gap? And compare your drawing to the gap that's in the reference. And that becomes useful in all sorts of things, like, for example, measuring the distance between the nose and the mouth. Paying attention to that gap. Measuring the distance between the corner of the eye and the nostril. That's another thing. So just using that as measuring the distance between the corner of the mouth and the other side of the face. Just that alone drastically improves your ability to get more accurate results. Get your eye used to seeing things correctly, knowing where you make your mistakes. So I highly encourage you guys to practice that as much as possible to develop a better eye for detail. Maybe I could fit one more in here. Probably has to be a little bit smaller. Can draw that toast that I mentioned. Can draw the curve at the very tip of the fingers. Same curve as the top of the toast. And now I'm going to start dividing the fingers. And that's just an example of your fingers stretching out. There's only so far that they could go between each other, towards the opposite sides. There's a limit to it. And notice how it really starts to arch outside of the palm area. So just examining that, it's kind of what this example is supposed to show. All right, everybody. It is coming to an end, actually, for this week. For figure drawing basics, but for not, we'll be back next week to continue on with more lessons, to more drawing of hands and fingers. I'm actually pretty excited about it. If you guys do enjoy this content, remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons. They both really help the stream, and of course I appreciate them a lot. You guys can also check out the Patreon page. It's something I haven't actually talked about for a while now. It's located in the About section. You guys can check it out. It's all the way on the right hand side. You could click on it, and there are different tiers on there to give you guys an opportunity to be part of the Out Lounge Alley. Of course, always supporting it as well to keep it going. But there are some interesting tiers there that are worth checking out, and you guys can take a look, see if any of them interest you. So stick around, everybody. I'm going to take a 5-minute break, and I'm going to be back for the special stream that I can't wait to show you. Hello, viewers, artists, and all alike to the Art Lounge Alley. This is the Project Stream Part 66, but today is a special intro, something that I'm really excited to show everybody. It's a continuation of one of my favorite artists, Gil Elvgren. He is a pinup artist, mainly worked in oils. He was an oil painter, and he did pinup art using oils, and he was also a photographer. He combined both to create beautiful images of women, and he was very well known in a circle of illustrators for his exceptional understanding of the figure and being able to combine that with seductive and alluring colors. So without further ado, everybody, I'm going to continue on with part 3. Now, this is going to be talking about his influences, people who really inspired him as he was growing up to becoming one of the best illustrators of the time. So if you guys missed out the first and second part, you can always go back by going to the video section in the Twitch channel and filtering based on collection and clicking on the highlights folder, and over there you will see part 2 and 3. If you're on YouTube, you could always check out the playlist section, and you guys will find all the folders there as well. And it's similar, there's a highlight folder. You can click on that to see all the previous special streams, including part 1 and 2 for Gil Elvgren. So I'm gonna transition into today's stream. So who are you looking at right now? This is Howard Pyle, and he was one of the biggest influences for a lot of the artists, actually. A lot of the artists that I've mentioned, a lot of the artists that I'm going to mention today, really learned a lot from Howard Pyle's school. He went on to create his own school eventually. It's called the Brandywine School, and it's also where the Brandywine philosophy of painting really surfaced. That philosophy ended up influencing a lot of artists, and a lot of them did continue on to teach the method of Brandywine School of Illustration. So a lot of people are going to ask, like, well, what is that exactly? What's the Brandywine School philosophy? A lot of it was something different. I'm not going to say it's there are some teachers who do teach it. I'm not going to say that it's I agree with it 100%, but what Howard Pyle was saying was that you can't really teach art. You could it's something that people have to search for. It's something that people have to experience in order to be able to connect with, to create art. But I think that you could teach it, but you can't force it. You could talk about all the different things that really inspire people to express themselves in an artistic way and express their ideas, and in a way of like what art and the art spirit is really about. You just can't force that, and some people might not really get into it. Some people might be interested in something else, or their attention gravitates towards something else, and that's totally fine. But yeah, his philosophy was that, and his way of teaching wasn't to teach technical things. Like, he really took people out into nature. They drew from nature. They drew from talks about like philosophy, and just getting people more and more, I guess, introspective. For people to really start digging deep within themselves and trying to inspire, curiosity and wonder, and to really connect with everything around them in order to start seeing things in the perspective that he envisions, that he understands. So yeah, his method was a little bit different. He really approached it in this more of a intuitive kind of perspective, where he wasn't really getting down into technical nitty-gritty details, and he was just really trying to invoke and inspire people through thought, through conversation, through dialect with yourself. And I will get more into that, actually. I'll be more specific, and I'll quote what people have picked up from Howard Pyle. But he does play a huge role in inspiring Norman Rockwell and Gil Elfgren, who both were familiar with each other. They formed a friendship, they formed a connection with each other, they talked and traded secrets, illustration secrets together. He's just a repeating theme when it comes to Gil Elfgren, when it comes to understanding his influences. So I'm gonna get into about him as well. But first, let me just start out by continuing from where I left off before, which was mentioning the previous artists in part 1 and 2. So long before he attended the first art class in 1933, Elfgren had been impressed by the early pretty girl illustrators like Charles Donna Gibson, Howard Chandler Christie, Harrison Fisher, as well as McClellan Barkley, Haddon H. Sundblom, who was really important in his influences, Andrew Loomis, also another great artist, Charles E. Chambers, and Pruitt Carter. And all of these influences and inspirations are the ones that I talked about in part 1 and 2, and I highly encourage you guys to check that out. But yeah, going on, early on, Elfgren tore out magazine covers and individual pages bearing illustrations by artists he admired or who interested him, which became his ritual. These pages became a comprehensive collection that would later influence both his painting technique and his approach to particular commissions. Elfgren shared his admiration from the Brandywine School's philosophy of painting with Norman Rockwell. The two men first became acquainted in 1947. The development of glamour illustration in the 20th century was the result of an early growth in commercial art as printing techniques continued to evolve and improve. It was a really booming period because technology wasn't as amazing as it is now. Mass production wasn't as immense as it is now. These were all just new things. The Industrial Revolution, it wasn't too far off from that time period. So people were excited to see all this new stuff that was printed. The ability to mass produce somebody's work, that was something that was also really refreshing at the time. And people got to see all these different illustrators, all these different artists and their creativity. Everybody was able to now witness that. It wasn't just people who knew the person or who were around at this person who were able to see it. Mass production allowed all that to be distributed all over the world, and all over, everywhere. So it was a really interesting period, and because of that, because every artist had their own style, their own approach, it really started to spark interest in people and really gravitated people to these magazines. So commercial art, in the late 19th century, commercial art expanded rapidly to keep up with the demand for illustrations in the news weekly and monthly periodicals and magazines. Within 10 years of Pyle's first published illustration, the American public was introduced to the first real pinup. This idealized all-American creation, blending the girl next door with the girl of your dreams, was called into life in Boston about 1887 by the pen of Charles Donna Gibson. That's somebody that I talked about in a previous stream. Quickly becoming the sweetheart of America, the Gibson girl was depicted primarily in pen and ink drawings. Her success was so overwhelming that Gibson girls' drawings were soon seen on the front cover and as the two-page centerfold in such popular magazines as Life and Colliers. Not familiar with that one. The single female of the early drawing developed into a group of females, then a man and a woman, or mixed groups. The male figure, known as the Gibson Man, was enthusiastically taken up by the admirers of the Gibson Girl. By 1900s, the Gibson Girl and the Gibson Man had attained unprecedented international popularity. The image of the Gibson Girl was seen almost everywhere throughout United States and Europe. Gibson's drawings were published and reproduced as prints, lithos, calendars, centerfolds, and magazine covers, as well as numerous advertising specialty products such as playing cards, notepads, ink bottlers, and ladies' fans. Even wallpapers, fine china, jewelry, boxes, and umbrellas carried the picture. The Gibson Girl enchanted more than one generation of America through, though she had her own beginning in the early Art Noir period. She was still going strong in the Roaring 20s. As a flapper, what does that say? Jitterbugging and dancing the Charleston in speakeasies, Gibson updated the style and manner of his drawing and the fashion in them to enchant the new audience during the Art Deco era, which is 1920s to 1930s. So this really goes further on, and it talks about all the previous artists as well. So this was just kind of a recap, I guess, for you guys who've missed out the first and second part, and you guys can always go back to that as well. But first, before I continue on and I give you guys like more insight and I talk about all these other artists, I wanted to go over the history for each one of them. So starting off with Howard Pyle, I'm going to give you guys a brief history about what he's done, and then I'll show you guys more of his paintings. So Howard Pyle, born in 1853 all the way up to 1911, was an illustrator and author. In 1894, he began teaching illustration at the Drexel Institute of Art, Science and Industry, now Drexel University. After 1900, he founded his own school of art and illustration named the Howard Pyle School of Illustration Art. Scholar Henry C. Pitts later used the term Brandywine School for the illustration artists and Wyeth family artists of the Brandywine region, several of whom studied with Pyle. His 1883 classical publication, The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood, remains in print. I'm going to show you guys that in a minute as well. He is also known for his illustrations of pirates and is credited with creating what has become the modern stereotype of pirate dress. His work influenced the design of costumes for movie pirates, from Errol Flynn to Johnny Depp. So like Pirates of the Caribbean, the way that they designed the costumes were based off of his idea, and a lot of people would say his style is kind of exaggerated off of what really looked, what pirates really looked like. Pyle was widely respected during his life and continues to be well regarded by illustrators and fine artists. His contemporary Vincent van Gogh wrote in a letter to his brother Theo that Pyle's work struck him dumb with admiration. His illustrations are vivid and imaginative, yet not overly fantastic or contrived, lending them an air of colorful realism. He was also a brief student at the Art Students League of New York. So this is another school that is a repeating theme with a lot of these artists. Art Students League, it's a great place in New York City. If you guys are resided there, if you're interested in just taking a class, it's a great opportunity because you don't have to have a degree of some sort. There isn't any requirement or there's no like admission test or anything like that. You just go there, you pay for what you want to take, whether it's painting, drawing, abstract, whatever. There's a huge list. You guys can go on their website, you can check that out, and it gives you an opportunity to study with some of the greatest artists of our time, and get an opportunity to improve your craft, meet people. It's a great place. I highly encourage you guys to check it out if you're around. But it just goes to show how much influence that and opportunity that school has created, and how much connection it has made throughout all these artists, all the way going back to the early 1900s to the late 1800s. So this is Howard Pyle, obviously, as you guys can see. And I'm going to show you more of his work. So really, I really like the style of it, because you could see the complexity of the color choices that he made. Like, these are oil paintings, and as you guys might have heard before, when I will talk about oil painting, it's a really difficult task to be able to get all these colors, to mix things properly, as opposed to what you would do digitally, right? You could undo colors. There are all these little shortcuts and room for forgiveness that you don't have when it comes to oil painting. So when somebody is able to create such beautiful colors, mixture of them, you could see that it's not just yellows. There's all different types of shades of yellow. There's also other colors like blues and reds that are mixed into it together to create a certain texture. Like if you look at the back of the ship, you could see how many different colors were used there to show like a worn away wood. But what I really like about this painting is like how, I guess, badass, right, they look. I mean, you could kind of see it in his face as well. There's like a little bit of like a menacing look, but the ship is caught in the middle of like a crazy storm. There's like water on deck and all that, yet the captain of the ship, he's just standing there completely unscathed by the storm itself. You know, you could see the winds are high based on this cape and how much it's fluttering in the wind. But yeah, he has this like defiant kind of stance where he's just like, I don't care. You know, yeah, my ship is rocking back and forth and there's water everywhere, and yeah, I'm holding ground here, unmoved. And then you guys could see the crew members, and they're all kind of like haggard a little bit, or just like taken back by the storm. And you could see in their face expressions that they're kind of worried, yet his face expression says the complete opposite. So it's a really cool, kind of badass image of it. And I really like it. There's a lot of drama there, right? The way that he drew the ship being hit by all these waves, and you could see the waves crashing into the ship itself in a background. It really creates this like dramatic scene, and of course it being tilted and him just basically standing in the middle of all that with water all the way at the top left, collecting on top of the ship itself. So just great use of color, you know, great use of drama in there. And all the folds I really like as well of the crew members. Like you could see the clothes are completely drenched, but the way that he drew all those folds in there, it's really well done. And I also like the colors that he used for their face. You know, there's so much complexity in that color to create all the different wrinkles and folds. And looking at the pirate all the way on the right with the long hair, I guess, looking at his fingers, there's a lot of detail there. And even the guy in the middle, when he's resting his hand on the ship to get some leverage, you could see on that hand there's like all these like wrinkles and grit basically on there, just from that little bit of detail that's on there. It's very cool. Moving on here, black and white, But again, even in, I really like how he draws hands. I think that's what really attracted me to this painting. There's a collection of his work, and you guys can check it out. You could do a little bit of digging there. It took me some time to find these images, but I just picked the ones that really resonated with me, and what I really liked about it was how he drew, or painted rather, the hands here. And it's just this cool scene of this artist basically sitting at home, practicing his music, and all these birds, who represent kind of music, and them chirping away at times, how they're just flying to his window to listen to him play. That's kind of what it looks like to me. They're there to enjoy the sounds. And it kind of brings up something interesting that I've experienced actually not too long ago, where there was a sound of birds that when I was at in my apartment, old apartment. I was sitting and I was focusing on some work, and I heard a bird, and it wasn't, I knew for sure that it was mimicking the exact sound of a car alarm, which was so bizarre. It was so surreal, because I was like, what is this, a recording? And I try to pay attention to hear if there are any repeating moments, right? Like you could hear the pitch or whatever else. And it absolutely sounded like it was a bird that was close by. And there was no indication of it being like some sort of recording or anything like that. But it was mimicking the sound of the car alarm, basically. So like they listen to this music or sounds, whatever, and they're able to actually do that. And it was such an interesting moment. I thought, like, wow, they really do pay attention and learn from people, in a sense, or what people create. So it just sparked that memory at some point. It was such a bizarre, surreal moment. But yeah, this is a cool scene. I like the face expression there of the old man, and how he was able to create all the wrinkles on his hands, the knuckles as well, really define the knuckles there, and the creases in his forehead. And I thought it was such an intimate painting too, right? It's like it really zoomed in on the window, and kind of like lets you be one of the birds, basically, right? Why else would there be a shot like that? Being able to see through the window on the roof. Yeah, very cool scene. Here, and you'll see the other ones, I absolutely loved the mood and the use of color. Like, just such a great understanding of lighting. As you could see, it's like the entire image has this like red vibrancy to it, from the skin color to the walls to pretty much everything around them. Really awesome color palette. And I also like the yellow-red sort of sunset in the background. Like a mix of yellow, green, and red. All of that there. And it was such an interesting period because people didn't have electricity at that time. It wasn't as popular and widespread. People still used like kerosene lamps and candles, and like if you ran out of candles, you were just basically in the dark. That's such a weird thing to think about, and especially in modern day where people are just constantly connected, to the internet, or constantly connected to electricity. It's unheard of to think of your reality being limited to that sort of existence, but that's what it was like back in that period. People were writing and doing things under the candlelight. Yeah, so I thought it was a very cool, dramatic scene, and just kind of highlighted that period in history. And to be honest, it doesn't seem that far away. 200 years is just 2 generations, really. People usually live up to like 90s or so. So, I'm gonna say it's close to just 2 generations of people. Like your great grandpa basically lived in those kind of conditions, which is so bizarre to realize. As opposed to like, your great grandpa. It wasn't that long ago, and most people still, I think, are connected to their great grandpas. So yeah, just moving on to the next one here. I'm trying to see if there's anything else that I could really touch up on before moving on to the next one. But yeah, I think it's just his excellent use of color here. And you guys will see as we move through how versatile he is. He's not just painting. This isn't just, it isn't just painting that he was doing. But I'd say here in this entire painting is just that. He didn't have to like completely draw out every single detail for everything. His understanding of color kind of brought life to everything else. His understanding of lighting kind of brought the drama into that scene, and you could see it's so much focused on the candles, what he's reading, and the light source is right in the center, pretty much. I think it's a very well done painting. Absolutely love it. Here, this highlights his fantastical imagination, as well as his beautiful rendering, by looking at the water. You could see like the foam forming. And it's sometimes looking at these paintings, they're more real than photographs to me at times. Like you look at it and there's something about it that that lives, and I think a lot of it has to do with the texture of paint. Because there is texture to it, it brings more life to a painting, as opposed to like a photograph. It's pretty flat. There's nothing there. And if you take a photo of a painting, you're still taking photos of that texture from the paint itself. It's kind of hard to explain. I guess that's one of the beautiful things about paintings. Or it could be that I'm just really into painting. But yeah, you could see here, it's also a combination of like realism and there's some dream quality, like dream state quality. Like, of course, there's fantasy to it, because if you pay attention, it's a mermaid that the person's hugging. So there's a little bit of that fantastical element. But I think the way he paints things, like you could see the background, like the sky doesn't look like that if you look out in the window, right? There's more clarity to it. Even though this shows that there aren't any clouds really by the fullness of the sun. And also just like the softness around the rocks, the softness around the bodies. It's not hard edged lines, but he has a perfect balance where it's not too soft, where it looks like the skin is kind of like spreading out into its environment. It's just enough to give it solid form. And pretty much everything else, like looking at his hand, the hand that's resting on her back or squeezing her back, you could just see all that shadow there and all the little bits of color in his veins even. It's just so well done, and I wish I could actually go and see the painting itself to get really up close and notice all these little details of paint and stuff that's defining the arm. But also great use of color, like going from the tip of the rocks, right, being hit by the light, to the reds and the yellows on both of the characters, and to how they're just kind of blending into the water itself. Just a really cool scene. And by the amount of time that I'm spending on each painting, everybody, I think this is going to be cut into a couple of parts. But anyways, going back to this is his Robin Hood work. as you can see, it's not just oil painting. He's also pretty good with drawings, and I thought it was such a cool piece of history. This is something that was done back in 1800s, late 1800s. So somebody's work from that time period is preserved. And I think there was a point where I actually did have this as a kid. Like I had the sketch, or I had the book, and I was able to flip through it, and of course it was like translated or whatever. But very, very well done. I really enjoy the line work. And the expression, the body language, how he's able to show this, like, I guess, sense of confidence in his body language. And you get to see all the cool little gadgets that are attached at his belt. It's very well done. It has like a very adventurous sort of spirit to it. And something about these drawings just kind of sparked like medieval times. And as you can see, it's like it's a different process, because when you are drawing, you're depending on lines, whereas with painting, you're depending on large, I want to say large clumps of paint. You're painting with large amounts of paste, basically. So when you are creating a leg, you're not doing a thin line defining the exterior. You're actually just like applying a thick amount of paste and forming that paste to shape a leg. So it's kind of like sculpting with a brush. You have clay, but the clay is very pliable, it's very liquidy, and you're able to just move it around until it's shaped into what you need it to be. So it's illustration is is more meticulous. Like you really are focused on the exterior lines, and you have to make sure you get all of them right. Whereas with painting, it's kind of like a sculpting process, I want to say. It's a combination of all three. It's like a combination of drawing and sculpting and using paint. So you could see that it changes a little bit, and of course this is a little bit, I would say it's probably his earlier work prior to his painting. So you're not seeing as high level of rendition as he did in the previous paintings that I showed you guys. But it's also, as I mentioned, it could be that it's just a different process. And it also could be that it's on purpose to give this like fantastical feel to things. But I love the background. I love that you see the castles and the everyday houses in the background, with the mill all the way in the back. And yeah, it has a little bit of like a biblical feel to it as well, like a mix of biblical and medieval elements. Yet it was like 1800s that he was drawing this stuff. So yeah, for those of you who aren't sure what you're looking at, that's Robin Hood. This is just a snippet from his Robin Hood illustrations. This is another one you guys will find if you do a little bit of digging. I liked it. I thought the stylized version is pretty cool. Like you could see the faces, and they're not as realistic as his paintings. It's more stylized, but I enjoy the color work that he has on it, and the drawing in general. It's pretty cool. Like he nailed, I want to say, the right leg really well, in perspective. And I also do see, I don't know if this is something that's related, but I do see a little bit of Mobius in this. Like I wonder if Mobius in some way was also an admirer of Pyle, but it could be just coincidental. I think there's just certain patterns in drawing, like little details that I notice here that I also notice in Mobius's work. For those of you who are not familiar with Mobius, you guys could also check out the special stream where I introduce you guys to Mobius's comics. It could be, you could find that in the About section of the Twitch channel, in the videos, sorry, not the About section, in the video section, and you could filter it based on collections, where you will see a highlights folder, and in that highlights folder you'll see all the previous Gil Elfgren streams, and of course the Mobius intro. Anyways, moving on to the next one. More drawings. I believe this is also from his Robin Hood comics. But yeah, here, just some elements here as well, some line work that I noticed that also represents or reminds me a little bit of Mobius. I also really like this one. This one seemed really meticulous. Like, and I just like the shot itself. You know, this guy that's kind of lurking in the shadows, literally like a rogue lurking in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity. I thought it was a pretty cool, dramatic scene. Here's more example of his pirate work, his style that he coined basically for pirates, with these very vibrant colors for the purple and the hat and the red cape. This is a cool painting. It's supposed to be the battle for who is going to be captain. So all these pirates gather up, and of course these are basically battles between two people who wouldn't back down, wouldn't back their ego down, and needed to settle things in this stupid, violent way. But cool action scene. You could see they're both trying to prevent the knives from flailing. They're just kind of caught in a deadlock between each other, and they have all the pirates in the background looking on to see who's going to win. You could see, like, even in the tiny bit of detail, I don't know how big this painting is, but just from this image there's so much expression in each and every one of them, from the guy holding his fist to his mouth to the one right next to him who's like showing this like anticipation and worry kind of, to the guy with a red hat all the way in the top right, who looks shocked in a way and concerned. All of them have such cool, interesting face expressions, but very well done. The sand is also really complex. Like, to try to paint sand, you know, that seems like a pretty big challenge, to be able to show all the different areas where, you know, there's like footprints and such, and varying depending on planes and such. Very well done. And we're back to the front. I guess I didn't spend that much time on this one, but it's just a cover to show that his focus was in that, like, he enjoyed painting pirates and pirate scenes and creating drama in their circle. There's a lot more, but these were the ones that I really enjoyed. So that's Howard Pyle. I'm going to be talking about him even more towards the future. Well, you're going to hear about him more in the future as I go through the other artists as well. But the next one that I have up is Henry Hintermeister. Now, I'm going over all these artists before I continue to talk about Gil Elfgren and how these artists influenced them, because I'm going to be also showing you guys parts in the book that illustrate some of the things that the book talks about. So just to get you guys familiar a little bit about these artists before they're mentioned in the Gil Elvgren journey. So the next one is Henry Hintermeister. He was a painter and illustrator from 1897 to 1970, so a little bit more contemporary than Howard Pyle. He was a painter and illustrator who painted in the golden age of illustration. He painted as a team with his father, John Henry Hintermeister, and together they created more than 1,000 works. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to give you guys a little bit of info about each one of them, because they all have such unique stories about their journey and how they've become illustrators and like what their focuses are. Like, I've never really read about any painters or artists that worked with their father on paintings and produced work. Like, that's a pretty unique scenario. I haven't really heard much about that. I mean, granted, John Buscema, who another artist of mine that I really love, he did work with his brother Sal Buscema, who was an inker, also artist. They worked together on their comic books. But yeah, I think that's a really interesting story. Henry's earliest published work featured family images of women and children, dogs, horses, and recreation. He also painted fantastic scenes with Indian maidens and scanty-clad Romans and Egyptians. In later years, he created iconic and semi-comical works with subjects including the multiple dangers of crossing the street, children and grandparents, fishermen, policemen, Boy Scouts, and hunters. One of his iconic works was the Uncle Natural series of painting for for Chilean natural soda. And you guys will see that in just a minute. Whoops. That is, I couldn't find a photo of Henry Hintermeister. Just kind of picked one that had both. Like, you could see as like fishermen that I mentioned. This is a recreational scene, and he drew policemen as well. There is no real image of him. And this is the series of paintings for the Chilean natural soda. So I also kind of noticed a little bit of, I'm going to say, Norman Rockwell-esque feel to it. Absolutely not the same style, but I guess it's like the subject matters are a little bit more sentimental, similar to Norman Rockwell, who I am excited to share with you guys as well. But this was another influence for Gil Elvgren. This is somebody that he looked up to. So I think here you could see a really well done face, having to paint and use all the different colors on the kid's face and his hand as well. I thought it was well done here. This is the comical scenes that they mentioned. It's like this grandma playing this marbles game. It has a little bit of a comic feel to it, I want to say. The many dangers of crossing the street. Yeah, I think that's pretty funny. But also well done, I think. He was able to capture a cool, I guess, accidental moment when it comes to it. These are his earlier works. This is something that he was doing in the very beginning, so you could see the style is kind of different. The colors are also different. But I like the subject matter. I think it's an interesting thing to try to capture. You do have to do a little bit of research to just find out what what things were like back then. And as lavishing as that seems, it was an awful period. You know, it was like, I think it was like the epitome of capitalism, where just like a handful of people who were totally delusioned by a god complex started like enslaving everybody and like abusing and using them to build all this like lavishing stuff for themselves because they thought they were godly. Awful period. But it is demonstrated by that, like, you know, the amount of riches and what kind of crowns people wore and how obsessed at that time people were with riches. I think it's just interesting how times haven't changed much, like the way that people behave and what delusional grandeur ends up creating. You know, something that I actually talked about before, and just in comparison, how modern day Empire State Buildings are the Egyptian periods of the time. Like, all those pyramids were built on the backs of slaves, basically, and in modern day, it's a little bit less so, you know, of a exploitive scenario, because still it's built on the backs of a bunch of people who are being exploited for terrible wages. Also, that CEOs could sit at the very top, right, at the very pinnacle of this pyramid, modern day pyramid we call skyscrapers, and do absolutely nothing but collect profits from everybody's hard work. And we got people all the way at the bottom, right? You got all those people who are cleaning things up, maintaining everything. You got like the IT and everything. They're all the way at the bottom, all the way at the basement almost. You know, this is like the typical corporate building structure. And you got people, depending on their status and position and how much they exploit everybody beneath them, going up and up and up further, getting closer to the peak of where these extremely rich people who are exploiting everybody are sitting. So it's not very different from the structural, societal structure of the Egyptian period. You know, you got CEOs driving around Lamborghinis, whereas back then people who were at the very top were, you know, they had a bunch of serfs and slaves who were bringing them everything at their disposal, which is kind of similar to like what receptionists do, where they buzz the receptionist and they're like, bring me a soda, and opens the door and somebody brings them a soda immediately. You know, they're wearing Rolexes and they're driving Lamborghinis, kind of similar to how these pharaohs and all those other ones were being carried by the most lavishing circumstances. And you could see this here on the boat, where they're being rowed by a bunch of people with barely any clothes, while she has herself draped on this very comfortable, what looks to be a sofa with all these lavishing fabrics around her, gazing out into the distance on the boat. So I'm just drawing a parallel that really not a lot has changed, and I think it's problematic. Like, we need to like evolve and start seeing things differently and having more progressive social structures, as opposed to keep making the same mistakes, because those periods ended up having catastrophic repercussions. But I just thought it was a really interesting parallel to back then to now. There's a lot more into it, but I'm not going to get way too much into it, everybody, because the stream is almost over. But this was another early piece of his work. This, I'm going to say, is the Roman period, right? Like a next similar structure, same exact sort of values. As you could see here as well, it's the same idea. This woman is lavishingly sitting around her riches. She even has a cheetah as a pet. And you could see the structure in the background suggesting that this person is well off, if you couldn't tell from the rest of the hints. But I'm going to say, yeah, this is his earlier work. Still pretty well done. You know, I'm going to say, and like her figure is pretty good, but it seems like her head is kind of small, to be honest. I'm not sure. There's a little bit something that's bugging me about it. I'm gonna say it has something to do with the face and the size of her head. But I like how the cheetah came out. I like how the background, the building in the background with a little bit of light there, that looks pretty cool. And I'm going to say this is my favorite one of his earlier works. I think he did a pretty good job getting the perspective on her face. Because it is kind of angled, and she does have this like wistful look about her. Yeah, all around I think it's beautiful. And it's an interesting scene. I'm going to say with the palm trees and just that era is pretty cool. To look into, like, the style is very different, of course, than modern day. A Native American scene, which is beautiful as well. Moment of her trying to capture a fish. But kind of a peaceful look on her face, you know. It doesn't look like she's like desperate to hunt for food and she's like, you know, frustrated and really trying to capture one. It's kind of like recreational almost. And of course being surrounded by nature. I think it's a really cool scene. I really do enjoy it. This is the thing that he was talking about before, well, that was mentioned before, about the dangers of crossing the streets and elderly people with children. You know, this whole like generational message about how as they grow older, they take care of the elderly while the elderly still takes care of the very young. At least that's kind of what I'm seeing in here. But I'm going to say the way he did her dress is probably the best in the piece. And of course, and I think in her face as well, like he was able to really use the light to demonstrate planes on the face. I think that makes it look pretty good as well. So the dress, I'm going to say, is the highlight, and also how he did her face is pretty good. And we're back to the front again. So that was Henry Hintermeister. I think he had some interesting history. You know, I think to highlight that he did work with his father on 1,000 paintings. I think that's a pretty cool endeavor. Unfortunately, everybody, it is coming to an end for this stream, so I'm gonna continue on. There's actually quite a bit to go. I did get into a couple of rants about all this different stuff, but I really did enjoy it. I hope you guys did too. The next illustrator that I'm going to be presenting on a next stream next week is going to be Norman Rockwell, and I absolutely love his work. It is incredible. It's fantastic amount of detail. The subject, there's something so unique about his work that I can't wait to show you guys, and can't wait to read some of the history about him, what his accomplishments were, and there's a lot. So make sure you tune back in next week, everybody. I will be announcing the day when there's going to be the 4th part of Kill Elfgren. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. I hope you enjoy your weekend. Hope you guys practice drawing. Hope you get better, stay inspired. And that pretty much does it. If you guys enjoy the content, make sure you remember to hit the like and subscribe button. They both help the stream. They're greatly appreciated by me. And of course, it's going to help the stream reach out to more audience, get more people familiar with all these different artists, all this different artwork, and tips on how to get them get better at drawing. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next week.